It rains pennies from heaven. Don't you know each cloud contains pennies from heaven?
So let's find out.
In three,
how valuable
two,
is
one,
it?
you're live.
Hello, 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 Santa Barbara. It's your Chantress of Everything Valuable and Beautiful. And I have a returning guest from 2 years ago. I have Janna Ireland with me, talented and interesting and insightful, introspective. I don't know how many adjectives I can pull up. Photographer, and our Museum of Art and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Santa Barbara, we're doing a collaborative show, and it's called Janna Ireland True Story Index. And just have to give a little disclaimer. When I spoke to Janna 2 years ago, it was in regard to her book regarding Paul R. William, the first certified Black architect west of the Mississippi River. And Williams was a Los Angeles native. And the book that I was interested in interviewing Janna about was her view. So it's called Regarding Paul R. Williams, a Photographer's View. And it's beautiful. It intrigued me, and I thought, okay, I've got to find Janna, and now Janna's been found again by our Museum of Contemporary Art and our Art Museum. And I want to know, Janna, what that title is all about, True Story Index.
Hi, Elizabeth. It's so wonderful to talk to you again. Thank you so much for having me back.
Do you remember it was 2 years ago. Was it your youngest? So you were sitting in the kitchen.
Yes.
And we were on Zoom because it was the middle of COVID, and the book had just come out. I think it was 2021. The book came out. I interviewed you in 2022, and I kept on seeing this little guy dart in back of the kitchen table, and he was making noise, and you tried to distract him, and he made no noise, and I thought to myself, I've been there. I've done that. I had my son, as a single mom. I was a single mom, but the way you balanced, I was impressed. The way you balanced the kitchen table, the little boy, and then there was another little boy's voice somewhere in the distance. And those little boys are now how old?
They are now 6 and 8, and thankfully at school today. And I am here in my office, so I have a nice, quiet space to speak to you.
Yes,
I'm
that
very
was
thankful for.
Were they not at school because of COVID during that time, or what was going on that they were home?
I'm not sure why they would have been home then. That was right after my family moved from the Valley here in LA to where we currently live in the Eagle Rock neighborhood. And I can't think of why they would have been home, but whatever the reason was, I'm sure that I had no other option that day.
That's right. Yep. Okay, so back to my question.
Yes.
The show is called Janna Ireland True Story Index. Why the title? Is it a True Story Index would indicate to me that it's about factual things, but that they're indexed in some way or balanced in some way. Tell me more.
That's absolutely part of it. The true story part is sort of a way to acknowledge that there are stories that are true or somehow really related to the truth, photographs that are straightforward, such as the photographs I made of Paul R. Williams's buildings or the photographs I made of West Hollywood at night. And then there are other photographs where the stories are not true, where I'm playing a character, where I'm not exactly myself in them. And those are more like when someone says true story to indicate that something is not actually true. And then in between, there are stories that have some truth, but may also be leaning into fiction. So that part of it is trying to encompass all of those different aspects of my work. And then there are a couple of things going on with index. There's the way that an index is a kind of list, a way to organize information. And then in photography, we talk about photography's indexical nature, that a photograph, a true photograph, is made from a subject being in front of the camera and the image, the light that comes off of that subject then being recorded on some kind of light sensitive surface. So that is an index. A photograph is an index of whatever that subject is. It means this thing was in this place in front of this camera, and now we're looking at it later in another place.
Okay, so apropos to that, you're the lead photo in the advertisement for the a morning with Janna Ireland, which is Sunday, February 25th at 11 a.m. at the museum. That is a beautiful picture of you on the patio. Your outstretched hand is holding an egg, and you are sitting at a table. Looks like a brunch or breakfast table in kind of nice summer clothes and looking beautiful, and the table is set. You're just the one person there. It called me to mind about this idea of you as a character, because you photograph yourself, quite a bit. And I'm looking at your website early this morning, I'm thinking, okay, I see Janna through, about 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years, and your children and your husband, etc. And what it made me think of is, how do you present a character and still remain true? In other words, the index part and the true part. So let me see if I have this right. When I speak with photographers in general as artists, they say, well, okay, because I need to get myself out of the way, sometimes I present both sides of the story. So I'll present one side of the story that I am most closely aligned with, but on the other hand, I present the other side of the story that I'm not all that closely aligned with. So I'll give you an example. I was telling you about Janna, my good friend Santi Vazali, and the show that is on right now at CAW, which is our creative arts workshop center on Garden Street here in Santa Barbara. And it's his documentation of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech at the UN building in 1976. And he was very aligned with the anti-war movement at the time. And so he was taking photos of peace activists and this sort of thing as Dr. King was speaking. But on the other hand, on the other side of the coin, there were protesters that were pro service people, in other words, pro army, pro navy, etc. And they were holding big signs, support our troops, even though it went against his grain to shoot sympathetically both sides. He only wanted to shoot one side sympathetically. He did. And I said to him, now Santi's in his 90s now, but I said to him, why did you feel compelled to do that? In almost every photograph that you took, you showed the other side as diplomatically as he could. And he said, because it's a good exercise in character. And I'm thinking, okay, well, now Janna's doing herself as a character especially in the series called The Spotless Mirror that I found in your oeuvre that was done 2011 to 2013. And I wonder, can you speak about that oeuvre and how that came to be and why you felt yourself to play a character?
The work that you're describing, The Spotless Mirror, is the same body of work that photograph you mentioned a few minutes ago with the brunch table and all of that comes from.
Yeah.
And in that work, I was photographing myself at my husband's grandfather's house in the valley. And what was going on then, I think, is that I wanted to photograph myself. I wanted to be seen in this work, but it also wasn't my house. I was interested in the house as a set, and it felt like to inhabit that set, I needed to be a character. I needed to be someone other than myself, even though, of course, I can't get away from looking like myself. I wasn't trying to do that either. I was trying to perform a different way than I usually do.
And the performance I felt was really interesting because it has to do, in my opinion, with the life of objects. And so you are, in essence, an object. And my work as an appraiser of objects, whether it be art or furniture or any kind of object, I'm really fascinated by the houses, the trapping of you say inhabitants. Well, the objects inhabit as well as the people. And I thought, oh gosh, when I was looking at that series called The Spotless Mirror of yours, I was thinking, okay, so the porcelains, actually, that I know what kind of porcelain it is. It's called Huschenreuter. It's German porcelain. The
Mm.
white porcelain, the dogs and the horses, etc., the animals, they start to have a life, and then the Murano bird in glass, Italian glass Murano bird, that starts to have a life. And I thought, oh, I really like this because then there's you as an object as well. And I thought, oh, how interesting. Oh, Richard's giving us a sign. We got to go to a quick break, but I want to reintroduce. I'm talking with Janna Ireland. This is the second conversation I've had with Janna. And this time we're talking about her show, which is at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art and also the Museum of Contemporary Art. It's a two-institution collaboration and presentation. It's on view February 11th to June the 2nd. And on February 25th, she's coming to the Santa Barbara Museum of Art for a conversation. It's called A Morning with Janna Ireland. Janna is an artist, and she's assistant professor in the Department of Art and Art History at Occidental College. And then she's got, well, her work is in many institutions: Nevada Museum of Art, California African American Museum, Santa Barbara Museum of Art, and the Museum of Contemporary Photography at Columbia College in Chicago, amongst other places. When I interviewed her in 2022, she was showing at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art's Charles White Elementary School Gallery and exposing the kids to some of her work. It's fascinating. And I'm so thrilled that she's coming to Santa Barbara to talk to us and also show her work. This is a series of work that I guess Charles Wiley and Janna and also Frederick Jenka have named Janna Ireland True Story Index. Fascinating title. Hey, Richard, let's go to quick break.
All right, you're clear.
All right. So yeah, so I want to finish the story about Santi, Janna. So Santi did these photos. She sent them away to Italy from New York by, jumping in a plane line and handing a bag to the first person that was going to Milan so that they could get this fresh off the shelf view of Dr. King. They ran only, I think, 4 images out of 6 rolls of 36. And, they paid Santi for them. And that was the end of the story. 2 years ago, so Santi's now, 92, 2 years ago, he gets a call from somebody in Italy saying, we are in possession of your photos. The magazine went defunct in 1970. Somebody bought the archives, and then the archives ended up in a bank vault. And the bank was something was happening with the foreclosure of the objects. And so somebody went into the bank vault and was kind of sorting through all the archives and called Santi and said, "Do you want your photos back?" Unbelievable.
It is incredible.
Unbelievable.
He could have never seen them again, but all these years later.
Yes, 57 years later, all this person in Italy had to do was let Getty Images get a hold of them, and the guy would have made tons of money because these were totally unseen of Dr. King and that day. And he's also part of that archive was also shooting Dr. King's funeral, which was 9 months after the speech. So, these were never before seen.
Wow.
And all, I mean, can you imagine what people could have, well, Getty Images, Lord. So, but yeah, they were returned to Santi, and then
Okay, we are coming back in
there's
3, 2, 1. You're live.
welcome back. I'm speaking with Janna Ireland, photographer, professor, philosopher, et cetera, et cetera. And Janna is, I think, a year away from her 40th birthday. Is that right?
Next year, yes, in
Next
August
year.
next year, I
And
will
so
be
this
40.
is, yes, this is a mid-career survey and the largest presentation of Ireland's photos and installations to date. And we were talking about one particular series of photos that I fell in love with, called The Spotless Mirror, and the photographs taken from 2011 to 2013. I really like that series because it plays with the idea of habitation and the objects that share our space with us. And I was asking Janna, she ended up being one of those objects sharing that space. And the space was not hers. The space was her husband's grandfather's house. Tell me a little more about that series, Janna.
Well, I knew that I wanted to use this house, but I wanted to find a way to connect it to the work that I'd been doing and my hopes for finding ways to represent myself in my work. So I came to the idea of putting the two subjects together. And through working on it, I guess the house itself became a character. And without really thinking about it as what I was doing, I began sort of photographing the house and thinking about architecture, which then led to a lot of other work that I did later.
Yep.
And I revisited the house several years later with my children and made a body of work that was a sequel to The Spotless Mirror. So that work, Milk and Honey, the photographs in the two bodies of work sort of talk to each other. And there might be one photograph in Milk and Honey that's a direct reference to a photograph in The Spotless Mirror. So I wanted
I
to
noticed
keep
that.
looking at this space.
Yep, I noticed that, and it intrigued me because there's the same themes running through both Milk and Honey and Spotless Mirror. I think the idea of the house as kind of a monument. You know, the house is sort of frozen in time. So,
Yes.
you know, the domestic quality, you as mother really came through. And then things that are associated with like frilly feminine things. Like there's an image that I fell in love with of you're holding, or a hand is holding a very ornate, flowered, pink, etc. teacup in a saucer. And then the next image, the teacup is broken on a slab of beautiful white marble floor. And I thought, oh, wow, that's, you know, playing with the idea of how things live in time and how they don't live in time.
Mm. I think that's a great way to look at those images. I think I wanted to just deal with some of those symbols of frilliness, as you said, of femininity, but then disrupt them a little bit and maybe talk about what is or what could be on the other side of this promise of a perfect life.
Right. The perfect life is as exemplified in a spotless habitation, which really is not spotless at all, because then, you know, the images of things that are broken, like the eggs that are cracked and the bees that are dead and this sort of thing. So with life, it's never as clean as we see in fiction, and and some of the photos are fiction because you're playing a character.
Yes,
Yeah.
the photograph that you just described with the teacup broken on the marble floor was actually not made at my husband's grandfather's house. It was made in the house I was living in at the time in South Pasadena. I borrowed a panel of floor from a company that sells marble tiles and things like that so that I could continue to make this work about one house while I was at home with my children in another house. So there's an additional layer of fiction baked into that one.
Interesting, 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 interesting. And like I said, going through both series, I was like, okay, I recognize the maker of this, I recognize the maker of that, and I can identify the porcelain and the sculpture, etc. And yeah, this idea that you get an idea of class as well. So it's, you know, middle upper class objects that you associate that fine German porcelain with, for example. And so, you know, I got a sense of um, your husband's grandparents and where they fit in the category of class and wealth as well, just by the objects.
Yes. And then thinking about how I fit in with those objects.
Yep.
There are things going on with time. The interior design in the house and these objects are very much from the 60s and kind of what was going on in interior design then. My grandmother had a lot of very similar objects from her own remodel in the 60s. So what does it mean to then deal with those objects in the 2000s? And how does that, what sense of time does that create in the photographs? When are they taking place?
Yeah. 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 So the idea, but a lot of what I saw in your work in regards to the objects themselves is sort of an ironic eye. So, okay, you know, you're looking at this as frozen, you know, when how can I describe this? So I don't even know if you knew this, but the porcelain that, you know, the white porcelain flower bowl with the flower frog on top of the animals in a circle. That image. Can you call to mind your image?
I think you're describing one that's it's an ashtray and it has three figures on top.
So it's not really an ashtray. It's a flower dish. It used to be. It's a German thing, but it's a. I don't think it's a. Maybe they used it as an ashtray, but it's a flower dish with a. It's got. Then it has the figures of the animals in the middle, and you float flowers in that thing. But at any rate, it's a German. It's a type of German porcelain. Like I said, the brand is Huschenreuther, and they specialized in animals that move. So it's like frozen sculpture. And they did that. That was a thing that was really popular in Europe. Their porcelain was super popular in Europe in the 30s and the 40s and into the 50s. And they specialized in these almost like frozen movement. And usually it's they're called in blanc de chine, white on white. So
I've
white
never heard that.
porcelain with a clear glaze. Yeah. And I looked at that, I said, oh, that is so cool, because the idea is that it's a photograph which is frozen in time of a work that's meant to be frozen in time in its inception, probably back in the 40s. So yeah, I mean, talk about layers, really interesting to me, because basically, like I said, to me, those objects speak about identity, class, time. As you say, the interior design has changed tremendously. And then also the kind of people that would, as I saw in those photos, treasure the idea that that was our life then, not change.
Absolutely. I think all of those things are sort of built into it.
No. Well, Richard's giving us, Christine, we got to go to a quick break. I want to talk about something maybe you can think about, Janna, during the break, which is in selecting the images for your show with Frederick and Charlie. The show is Janna Ireland True Story Index, on view February 11th to June the 2nd. By the way, there's an artist talk Sunday, February 25th at 11 a.m. at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. It's called The Morning with Janna Ireland. Janna will be speaking at the museum. I want to ask this question when we get back from the break. Was there one photo in the show that was hard to make? Hard to make, difficult to make, and why? And when you reviewed your work to pick that one, was there like a little bit of a I don't know, like a struggle or I struggled with it then. Am I struggling with that image now kind of feeling?
Okay.
That's what I want to know when we get back from break. Hey, Richard, we'll go to a quick break and we're back with Janna Ireland in just a second.
You're clear.
So, Richard, this is the new pup. This is the new pup. What do you think, Richard? This is the new pup.
Oh, he's adorable. Just adorable.
He's very
It is a
long.
he, right?
That's a he. He's very long. He was neutered yesterday. We're struggling a little today, but almost two, we think. And yeah, he's helping me get over the loss.
Oh, that's what he's there for.
Yeah.
He found you, Elizabeth. Remember that.
Yeah. Jenna, my old baby that I'm sure I had him on my lap last time we spoke 2 years ago. He was always with me. Yeah, he was in a car accident and left about a month
Oh,
ago.
I'm so
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
It's always so hard, but when it's sudden, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. And
that breaks your heart.
Yeah. And this one was advertised online. My son said, I think I like this one. And a couple days after the accident, then we drove to this lady's house in the middle of nowhere. And she didn't speak, well, she put it this way, I didn't know much about the dog. And she just kind of handed the dog to me. I paid her for the dog, and that was it. I knew nothing about the dog. Didn't know if he was healthy, didn't know, but turns out that not only turns out that he is not just healthy, but I have two vets that I love, and he's in training. This dog is Slinks, and he's in training now, my dog trainer, and I'm a dog person. And all three of them say, wow, that is breed standard, which means he's a show dog.
All right, we are coming back
Yeah.
in 3, 2, 1. You're live.
Welcome back. I'm speaking with Janna Ireland, and it turns out I thought I discovered her myself 2 years ago when the Historical Preservation Society had an advertisement for her book and gave it glowing reviews. And I thought, I got to find this book and I got to find this artist. And a couple of years back, I interviewed her on this station here. I remember her kids running around during the hour. Now the Santa Barbara Museum of Art is doing a mid-career survey, retrospective, etc. Janna Ireland, True Story Index. Charles Wiley's curating along with Frederick Yanka of the Contemporary Art Museum here in Santa Barbara, and it's a collaborative show. My question for Janna before the break, was there an image in the show that was picked by the two curators and Janna that was a difficult image to take and perhaps a difficult image to accept into the show itself? What do you think, Janna?
The example that I'm thinking of wasn't necessarily difficult to get into the show, but was really difficult to make. The show has a lot of work that I made between, say, 2011 and maybe around 2022. And then when I found out that the show was happening and that I had the opportunity to bring all of this work together, I also wanted to make some new work. That's part of what the curators and I decided for putting the show together, that new work needed to be generated. So what I decided to do was make a body of work, really a single piece about my grandmother, and make it in the darkroom. So what I usually work digitally, usually with a digital camera, and make digital prints, or even if I'm working with film, the prints end up being digital. But I wanted to make this project in the darkroom because I wanted to use her actual photographs. I wanted to work with her photographs, not with an image of her photographs that was scanned and put on a screen. I wanted to have the objects and manipulate them in the darkroom space. So I spent a period of, oh, sorry.
Let me interrupt so I understand. You wanted to work with your grandmother's photos. Did your grandmother take these photos?
My grandmother took many photos in her lifetime, but I was mostly interested in photographs of her.
Okay,
I
got
wanted
it.
to make sort of a portrait of her through time. So I spent a period of time going through these photographs, deciding what I was interested in using, and then several months working in the darkroom and creating these individual panels. The final piece is 21 panels, all meant to be shown together in a particular order that I consider one big piece. And so I was day after day returning to the darkroom, working with these images, making new versions of the images, deciding whether I wanted to keep them or remove them, thinking about how they fit in with all of the rest of them and how they contributed to the story of her as a person and her interests and her life. There are a couple of photographs that she took included. I wanted to think about her as a person who traveled and was very excited about the world and was looking at the world through a camera, but I also really wanted to look at her. And I also brought in some objects that belong to her, some jewelry, including the necklace that I'm wearing right now that I wear every day, and things like flowers. There are lilies included in the work. Lilies are morning flowers, so I made this work just a few months after she passed away, and I was still processing that and dealing with it. And it felt as though making work that was about this labor-intensive process, making work that was about this duration, about spending a lot of time with these materials and really thinking about them, felt like a good and appropriate way to mourn and to kind of meditate on her as a person and her effect on my life, which was enormous.
So do you think that the series of 21 images, that's one work of art, if I was to look at those images, would I see your grandmother as you see her?
I would say you would see some things that I see, but there's no way to get everything about her as a person or my experience of her as a person into the work. So I didn't even try. And I also didn't want to make work about her as a grandmother. I didn't want to make work about her as a mother. So there's an image that I'm in, but I block my own face with an image of her face. There's an image that my aunt is in, and I sort of hide her face. So my grandmother is the person you see again and again. And then the only other person you see is my grandfather, who passed away when my mother was 8. So I wanted to really look at her as a woman, as a person who was vivacious and youthful and funny and had all of these interests outside of the family life that I knew her from.
What role, this is a girly question, but what role did clothing play?
In the work about my grandmother, I think I was in looking at her clothing, there were a lot of clues about time.
Yeah.
So you can maybe understand that a particular photograph is from the 1940s or from the 1970s or made closer to her death, the way that someone maybe in their 80s or 90s might dress in contemporary time.
And it's interesting because I noticed that round shapes intrigue you, such as the egg and the pearls that people wear, women wear around their neck. There's a number of pearl jewelry shots. And that's what made me ask that question about what her clothing was the clothing also a character in the selection of the 21 images?
To some extent, but it was really about her and her smile, and maybe hair is more of a factor than clothing. A lot of the images are cropped closely enough that what you're really seeing is her face, and then her hair could be another clue about time and style.
In what way, Janna?
Just there's a style that looks very much like a woman would have worn working at home during World War II, or a style that is more more of an 80s style or more of a 90s style.
Definitely, yes, definitely. And that was a difficult series just because you were mourning, but also the mechanics of it. The medium itself is more difficult because you're in the dark room. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, it was difficult to go through the pictures, especially. There was one day I was looking through her pictures and I found a piece of tape that she had touched and left her fingerprint on. And looking at that and thinking, I might be the last person who really looks at this and is deeply moved by it and thinks of it as an object that this person I love very much touched and left a trace on. And then yes, the process itself was difficult and very time consuming, but also felt very good and kind of cathartic.
Right. So, Richard, I sense, okay, you say you have to wind this section up, but I sense so Richard had a dark room in his bedroom as a kid. And Richard was intrigued from time he was tiny with the process of the dark room. And I could see on Richard's face he was dying to ask you a question. So our producer, Richard Dugan, what question do you have, Richard? I can see it all over you.
I'm going to put this question to you, but I want you to answer it after the break, if we can do that. It has to do with working with, again, your grandmother's pictures. Were you working with actual photographs or were you working with the negatives? So I want to, and that process, because I absolutely loved working with my enlarger with clear and semi-clear objects that I would put on the photo paper and so forth, and then manipulating the images in contrast and so forth. So can we do that, Elizabeth? Come back after the break?
Okay, let's go to quick break.
Okay, you are clear.
So, Jonathan, I was finishing the story about Santi, where, 2 years ago in the mail, just like through the mail comes these rolls of film. I guess somebody had looked at them enough to understand that they were of this famous man, and the, Italian guy from the bank who said, that looks familiar somehow. And he did a little bit of research, I guess, and found Santi. I guess he went into the archives and found the magazine where 4 of those images were used. And then when Santi got those images back, he, those images he turned into digital images. They were film, obviously, and turned them into digital images, and then got together with the Martin Luther King Jr. of organization of Santa Barbara, and said, look, I've got these images, and I've got, what is it, 6 times 36, never before seen. And they said, unbelievable. First of all, that somebody was morally responsible enough to give the artist back the work was incredible. One of the members of the board at the opening said to me, well, it's a testimony to Dr. King, because you can't have pictures of Dr. King and be immoral with them. So I said, okay, that could be the mainspring there. But Santi then did a show. He sold a lot of the images. Of course, they were, digital images. He sold them, and he gave all proceeds to the Martin Luther King Jr. Foundation. So it was a win-win all around. Sandy didn't make a dime off of any of the images. And
All right, we are coming back
okay.
in 3, 2, 1. You're live.
Welcome back. Now, Richard asked Janna Ireland a question when we, let me give a little background. So if you're just joining us, Janna did, first of all, this interview is to celebrate the show coming up, or actually opened, Janna Ireland True Story Index at our museum. It'll be February 11th. It opened June 2nd. It closes. But the reason that Janna's on the air right now is that I want to announce there's a Sunday, February 25th, 11 a.m. talk that Janna will be giving at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. Now, Charles Wiley and Frederick Yanka are the co-curators of the show. And they got together and said to Janna, look, we need you to make some current work. Janna decided to do a darkroom series of her grandmother's photos of pictures of her grandmother through time. They are in I don't know what you call a 21 image. It's not a triptych or diptych. It's a 21 titch.
I'm sure there's a word for that.
Yeah, there's one. It represents one body of work shortly after Janna's grandmother had passed. And I asked a question of Janna, if I looked at the 21 images, would I understand, would I know her grandmother? Janna said, well, you would partially. And then Richard said, okay, so were those images, go ahead, Richard, ask that question again.
Were they the actual photographs, or did you have access to the negatives?
So there were a few different processes involved in making this. There were actual photographs of hers, and for those, I was able to make contact prints. So I could take the surface of one of her photographs and put it face to face with the light sensitive surface of a new piece of photo paper and expose them to light in the darkroom, and then make a reversed copy of that image. That's process number one. Process number two involved making negatives. There were no negatives included in her photo albums, and a lot of the photographs are stuck to the pages and can't be removed without destroying them. So in order to bring those into the process, what I had to do was re-photograph them to generate a set of new negatives that I could then bring into the darkroom, put into the enlarger, and expose to create photographic images. Yeah. And those were fun to work with because they could be layered, and then I could change the size and things in a way that I couldn't when making those contact prints from her images.
Now, why photograph those photos, if you will, those pictures that were stuck, as opposed to scanning them into the computer? What did you want to stay away from digitizing?
I wanted to continue to work with them in the darkroom. There's something exciting to me about using the darkroom in kind of an experimental way. And then it also allowed me to blend those other types of images with parts of the images made from the third process, which is the photogram process, which would be putting an object like a flower or this necklace that I mentioned a moment ago onto that same light sensitive paper and exposing it to create kind of an outline of that object on the paper. So through creating these negatives and also working with actual physical photographs in the darkroom, and then also laying objects on top of the paper, I could create images that were that had kind of different dimensions to them. So the final images are flat, but they're a combination of several different kinds of images.
And it sounds to me like you prefer analog versus digital photography and processing simply because, and in spite of how sophisticated programs like Photoshop are, you don't have the tactile experience that you have when you're in the darkroom, and I can attest to that.
Yes. The work that I made of my grandmother theoretically would be a lot easier to make in Photoshop But if I try to do something like that in Photoshop, it just isn't fun. It isn't, I don't get the same satisfaction from it. And I do love working digitally. I love how, I can make some really beautiful prints with the camera that I'm using and with a great printer, but I really wanted to get that tactile experience, to move the objects around and then move them through the chemistry in the darkroom and go through the process of making multiple copies of each one and all of that. I wanted to have fun in the darkroom and sort of return to what first excited me about photography and photographic process.
There's also, Richard, this thing that, I can really identify what John is saying as regards to the feeling of working in the dark, and actually paying homage to someone who's gone. I remember when my grandmother left the planet, the family all flew out, and we all got together in her house. And I remember I was in graduate school at the time. And I remember going to her costume jewelry drawer. And even though, what difference does it make if the costume jewelry is sorted out or not before the funeral? What difference does it make?
Yeah, exactly.
But to me, I thought it's really important, and I've got to touch all these things and make sure that each thing was categorized.
It's a ritual and a ceremony of sorts. I absolutely couldn't agree with you more. Yeah.
So do we have a few more minutes, Richard?
Well, we do. Following this break we need to take.
Okay, let's take a quick break and then we'll just reintroduce Janna and tell about the lecture that's coming up with her. Okay, let's go to quick break.
All right, you are clear.
Thank you.
I be honest with you, and it was back in my 20s. I was going to junior college back in Phoenix Junior College, taking a photography class, black and white. I had my father's 35 millimeter Argus. I still have it and the flash attachment, no bulbs. And I purchased along the way the canister to process the film, the 35 millimeter film, the trays, the chemicals, the whole shoot and match. My brother was not real happy with the fact that we were using our bedroom as the dark room, but nonetheless, there was just something about turning the lights out. And sometimes I would be doing things in pitch blackness before I turned on the enlarger with one of these transparent plastic geometric puzzles. And I would put it on top of the paper and I would expose it and so forth. There was just something about that so has always intrigued me. And the irony is, I was born and remained legally blind until I was 36. So as I said, this was in my early 20s. So it was really funny how I was taken to photography with the vision. But talking about analog to digital real quick here before we come back, we went to Ireland, my wife and I, on our honeymoon back in 2002 and went back again in 2004. In 2002, I bought several of those cardboard boxed 35 millimeter cameras, and I sent the film in to have it processed. And of course, it was then provided as a digital format, but I also have the negatives. The second trip we took, my father lent me his digital Kodak camera. And the difference was I had to process every single one of the analog to brighten them up just a little bit, whereas I didn't have to with the digital. Okay, enough of me. Elizabeth, you have 5 minutes. In 3, 2, 1, you're live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart. I'm speaking with Janna Ireland. Her show is at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art True Story Index, and it is a mid-career survey and the largest presentation of Janna's photographs and installations to date. And I have to say this is a delight because I spoke to Janna when she came out with her book on, well, it's called Regarding Paul R. Williams, and it is an architectural book. And my master's was in architectural history, and I was so fascinated by by this particular book. And regarding Paul R. Williams, A Photographer's Views, published by Angel City Press in 2020. And so I interviewed Janna about this book, which was featured in the Historical Preservation newsletter at the time. And now Janna is coming to Santa Barbara with a complete retrospective mid-career survey of all her work. And I had a delightful morning looking at the work online, and you can find it with Janna Ireland. And Janna is Janna, Ireland, like the country Ireland. What's so interesting is there's a lot of images of identity, female identity, Black identity, the identity that one forges through time. That's fascinating insofar as some of the themes that are in the work in general are really dear to my heart, which is having to do with a structure, a building, a home, a habitation, the domestic side of life, including stuff of the house, objects. Janna, what do you think about when you are focusing on an object? What does that object say to you?
I think it depends on what it is. It depends on who it belongs to. Lately, I've been photographing a lot of objects that belong to my children. And when I photograph them, I think that they are about process of play and exploration, the process of growing up, the process of learning through touching, and I don't know, silliness sometimes, about the mess that children can create and that family life can create. But if I am focusing on an object in a very orderly home, it's telling a different story. It might be telling a story about wealth, or it might be telling a story about the fragility of that particular object, or about the color of the object and the light reflecting from it if it's a color photograph, or about the formal qualities of the object if it's in black and white.
Right. So what's so interesting to me is the word itself. So if you talk about, you said your children's belongings, to belong is also part of that word, and habitation has to do with the word that Richard was using, a habit, a ritual. There's, I really get that sense of the double identity of words like that when I'm looking at some of your images. Just a quick shout out. We've got Janna Ireland True Story Index. It opened February 11th at our Santa Barbara Museum of Art. Go see it. And then Sunday, February 25th at 11 a.m., you can go and meet Janna herself and talk with her about her work. Go see the work first and come to the Morning with Janna Ireland on Sunday, February 25th at 11 a.m. at the museum. Thank you, Janna. I appreciate it. And I can't wait to see the show. I'm going this weekend. Can't wait to see it. And it's great to talk with you yet again. And congratulations on this really remarkable show. And she isn't even 40 yet. Richard, how about that?
Thank you for having me. I had such a wonderful time speaking with you again.
Thank you, Janna. Bye.
Goodbye.
All right, you are clear. Very good. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Some of the things that are just clues. You know what? Here again, I am. I don't know if you. Yeah, I'm a pearl person. And I kept on seeing, and so was my grandmother. My mother, not so much. But yeah, it's these little clues that you get. And Janna, your grandmother was a traveler. She was an explorer.
She was an explorer. She was a card player. She was the oldest of 7 children, and they were growing up during the Depression. So she had kind of a hard childhood where she had to spend a lot of time caring for other people. And then my grandfather died, and she was a single mother for a long time and put herself through night school to get a college degree. And she was just amazing. And so much of my ability to get out and